Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today we're going to talk about Chainlink and we're going to investigate whether $1,000 link is theoretically possible this market cycle. So, if you guys like the content, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel in the description below, as well as the premium list at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, first of all, this video is not a just pie in the sky type prediction where I just tell you what I want to happen or anything like that. What do we look at on the channel? We look at the data and we look at long-term data trends to investigate whether things are more likely to go in one direction or another. We look at momentum shifts in the market, etc. Okay, so this is just a simple analysis of the price of Chainlink and whether it could theoretically reach $1,000 this market cycle. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take a look at our LINK Bitcoin valuation chart. Okay, so this was a chart in the video I published yesterday. If you're not familiar with this video or with this chart, it shows you the LINK Bitcoin valuation on a logarithmic scale, meaning going each major tick is 10x, okay, versus time, and it's color coded by the risk metric, which is just something I use on the premium list to try to help identify local tops and local lows. But that's not actually the focus of this video. What we're going to be looking at is just this general trend, okay? So the first thing we want to do is, we're looking at it here. It only extends out to January 2021, and the ratio only goes up to 1/1000th of a Bitcoin or 2/1000ths of a Bitcoin. Now let's extend it out. Okay, we're going to extend it out to 2024, and we're going to extend the LINK Bitcoin valuation as high as 0.1. Okay, so 10 to the minus 1 is 0.1, meaning theoretically, if LINK were to get to this value, then it would be worth 1/10 of the price of Bitcoin. Now, at today's prices, 1/10 of $13,000 would be $1,300. Okay, so this would be quite a valuation to have even at today's prices. But what's interesting is, again, to look at this macro trend that we identified last year and we're continuing to capitalize on year over year. Okay, we're continuing to look at this trend and say, you know what, it might not hold forever. We recognize it's always if the trend holds, it might not hold forever, but if it does, then this is where it's headed. So we'll just draw a pretty generic trend line. Okay, and all this does is it essentially encapsulates the entire LINK Bitcoin move except for this peak in 2017. So it does not include that, but you can see the rest of the price data for literally the last 2.5 years falls within this upward sloping trend line. And looking at this trend line, we can try to identify, okay, well, at what point will it get to a certain valuation against Bitcoin if the trend line holds? Okay, so one of the things we can look at is looking at the various time frames in which it broke through key milestones on the LINK Bitcoin valuation. So here was 10 to the minus 4. The first time we broke through it was around 2018. 10 to the minus 3, the first time we broke through it, approximately halfway through 2020. So if we want to keep going up, the next step up and would just be essentially another order of magnitude gain on Bitcoin. And right now, this is exponential growth because it's moving up linearly, but it's on a logarithmic scale. Therefore, it is exponential growth. So if this exponential growth continues, the first thing we can note is, this was approximately 2.5 years. So if we were to do another 2.5 years, then the LINK Bitcoin valuation would actually cross 0.01, so 1/100th of a Bitcoin, sometime in early 2023, if it takes approximately the same time as it did before to reach that, to kind of cross through that valuation. It would take approximately until 2023. Okay. Now, one of the things we have to note is that, well, if we were to actually stay within this trend line for the next 2.5 years or so, or 1.5 years, to well, I mean, if extending it out from the end of 2021 all the way out to, they say, the end of 2022, if we were to stay within this trend line, then at the earliest we could break 0.01 would be the end of 2021, and then the latest would be, nearing the end of 2022. Okay, so this would where it would theoretically put us if we were to stay within this trend line. The downside to these types of trend lines is that you can subtly shift how you draw them and come up with an entirely different story, right? Which is why I decided to measure it as, just the time it took from this one to this one, recognizing we have had exponential growth and speculating that if it takes the same amount of time, then it would put us at a valuation of Link against Bitcoin of 0.01 by early 2023, if that same trend were to hold. And what I mean by drawing trend lines slightly differently, obviously I think this is the best trend line drawn, but you could also draw it like this. And you might think, well, that looks kind of weird, but if you remove the green line, you could kind of understand how someone might draw it, because instead of ignoring this peak over here, we shifted upwards to essentially include that peak, except for maybe this one data point, and then to fully encapsulate this peak as well. And then just say that, okay, these were just final capitulations and we don't want to include that in the data. And then you get a slightly more conservative trend line. I mean, this is still very bullish, a very bullish scenario, but it's a little bit more conservative. And this trend line actually falls within, potentially reaching this valuation when we would cross it in, say, 2.5 years, the same time frame that it took, us to go from 10 to the minus 4 to 10 to the minus 3, then to go from 10 to the minus 3 to 10 to the minus 2. If it took the same amount of time and we had this trend line, it would put us potentially reaching it sometime in 2023. So if we look at this, what's important about 2023? Well, if you follow the channel, we talk about logarithmic regression in terms of the price of Bitcoin. And this is a logarithmic regression curve fitted to non-bubble data. And we can look at the price minus the regression line divided by the regression line and find a nice trend that shows essentially cycles lengthening. Okay? Now, this is not meant to be an argument against, necessarily saying that, if you believe in the 4-year cycle, you should change your mind. If you think the 4-year cycle theory is correct, then that puts Bitcoin peaking in approximately 1 year. I believe that it will take longer than 1 year, and that it'll take several years for us to slowly build back up rather than explode back up like a lot of people would think. I admit I could be wrong. It's just that what the data suggests to me is that it will take longer this market cycle because, well, it's taken longer every market cycle so far. So then, if we go back to this chart and look at the Link Bitcoin valuation, one potential trend is for the Link Bitcoin valuation to move approximately sideways for the next year and a half, or a little bit over a year, and then break upwards. Well, why would this be? Well, one of the reasons is because I think that and again, this is a point of contention among a lot of people, is that I think it'll take another year or so for Bitcoin to reach a sustainable $20,000. And it was once Bitcoin reached a sustainable $1,000 or $1,100 in the last market cycle that's what really was the catalyst for a lot of altcoins to make major moves, including coins like Ethereum and a lot of other coins. They made major moves again once Bitcoin got to its sustainable prior all-time high. So if Bitcoin does get to a prior sustainable all-time high of, say, 20K in the next year, then following it, it could lead to another massive Link Bitcoin bubble. Now, there could be several mini bubbles in the meantime, right? There's been several of them in the past. You can see all these nice price appreciations of Link against Bitcoin. I tried to just kind of draw some squiggles in here to essentially highlight that possibility. Note that there could be mini bubbles in the meantime, but recognizing that, there could be a pretty significant explosion in growth of the price of Link, like we saw a few months ago, at the end of 2021, maybe beginning of 2022. And again, we could see some in the meantime as well. But in lieu of the idea that Bitcoin could be getting to a sustainable $20,000 by that point. And then we know, historically speaking, that it won't go up forever and that Bitcoin will take the reins again. And as it makes its way to a potential $100,000 Bitcoin, or whether it, maybe it's $75,000, maybe it's $140,000, if it does that, then the dominance of Bitcoin will go up and altcoins will bleed against it. Therefore, during that time period, on that move that Bitcoin might make from, say, 20,000 up to approximately 100,000, the Link Bitcoin valuation would likely bleed, and then eventually it would probably peak again one last time for the duration of the market cycle, and this would be following the paradigm shift in the price of Bitcoin, and then we would probably come back into a bear market, right? But again, I mean, that's not to say that this has to stop. This entire trend here was in a bear market. But the important thing to note is that exponential growth will not last forever. So I can, you can be almost 100, not 100% sure, of course, but you can be like 99.9% sure that, and again, this is not financial advice, that this exponential growth of Link against Bitcoin will not last forever. Okay, it just simply won't. But we it can be a hell of a fun ride until it stops. So with that in mind, we want to be cognizant of the fact that the trend could change, right? I mean, it could be that the Link Bitcoin valuation goes sideways. We have never seen what Link can do against Bitcoin in a bull market. We've seen in a bear market what it can do. We've seen in an accumulation phase what it can do. We do not know what it will do during a bull market. So far, it has done pretty well. However, and this is assuming we're in a bull market, from at this point, it was always at this point after a Link pump and then subsequent retracement against Bitcoin, it was at this point, historically speaking, that then Bitcoin broke down below the 20-week moving average, which is what led to a short-term price depreciation of Chainlink. But this time, so far, that hasn't happened. So we are in completely uncharted territory, literally speaking, uncharted territory, and I cannot tell you, I do not know what will happen if this trend will continue, like a slow uptrend, not really slow, I mean exponential. Whether we'll start to move sideways and then it completely changes the game, or if maybe we break upwards and accelerate even faster. I cannot tell you this. The point of this video is to give a pragmatic approach to, is a $1,000 chain link possible, just looking at this long-term macro trend in the Link Bitcoin valuation. So then we say, well, if it crosses 0.01 of a Link Bitcoin valuation in 2023, well, what does that mean, right? So let's clear some of the stuff we had on the chart so we can get a better view. So if it breaks this level, what does that mean? Well, so what, right? I mean, all this depends on the price of Bitcoin. Now, this is the Link Bitcoin valuation, but if, imagine a world where if Bitcoin is only worth $5,000 at the time in 2023, then if Link reaches, say, 0.01, then that only puts Link at $50. And, a $50 chain link would be awesome, right? That would be great. However, most of us are probably not here watching this video if you think that Bitcoin will only be worth $5,000 in 3 years, because it is the market mover. If Bitcoin is doing well, it usually means the rest of the cryptocurrency market's doing well, not the other way around. When Bitcoin is doing well, altcoins can do phenomenally well. When Bitcoin's doing poorly, altcoins not so much. Chainlink never got that memo, but for the most part, altcoins don't do quite as well. So to break this down a little bit further, let's go back and look at the Bitcoin logarithmic regression chart that's fit to non-bubble data for the last decade, and talk about, okay, well, this is what a theoretical next peak could look like over the next several years. There could be mini bubbles in here, of course, along the way. And if we take this trend line and look to see, okay, well, it's going to be approximately 250% overvalued, then essentially it's going to be putting the price of Bitcoin probably around $140,000. And what that means is we're looking at the percent overvaluation from the fair value in 2023. If it's approximately 200 to 300% overvalued, it's probably going to put Bitcoin in the price range of 100 to 140K. And I'm just coming up with this from this macro trend line, seeing that we've come to it 3 separate times. And if we come to it a 4th time, the percent overvaluation with respect to the trend line will continue to decrease, but it gives us an idea of where it could theoretically peak. But as I've said before, right, I mean, it might not be 100 to 140K. It could peak at 80K. It could peak at 175K. My contention here, again, is what's a few K among friends. I will not be able to tell you exactly where the peak is. It could be at 50K for all I know. But we can use as many tools as possible to try to identify it when it comes. So if it comes earlier, then a lot of these, these indicators that I talk about on the premium list, again at intothecryptoverse.com, will be going off like crazy. But if what I think is going to happen happens and it takes longer, then those will still be going off just at a later time and a higher valuation. So the longer it takes to move up, I think the more likely it is to go higher than if it peaks earlier. So for instance, if Bitcoin were to peak in 2021, then I don't think it would be that it would go quite as high as it could as if it peaks in say 2023. You might say, well, it looks like if you were to peak in 2021, well, it would be overvalued by a higher percentage. It would be, but you would be comparing it to a lower fair value. The fair value would be much lower at the time. So that's the reason why it still would be lower. So if we continue on and say, well, if Bitcoin is 100K in 2023 and Link Bitcoin reaches a valuation of 0.01, well, doesn't that mean $1,000 per link, right? I mean, 0.01 times 100K is $1,000. So that would theoretically put Link at $1,000. And if you think this is completely absurd, remember Ethereum started at less than $1 and then peaked at over $1,400. So it's not entirely out of the question. I do concede that for the most part we are experiencing diminishing returns as well as lengthening cycles. So the possibility that Link would see these types of returns would be significantly harder, in my opinion, than if it had been going on the same trend last market cycle. Be that as it may, it still could theoretically happen. And if it did happen, it would probably be for but a brief moment in time. Now, there's a difference between whether it could happen and whether I think it'll happen. Because remember, this is not based on what I think. This is just based on the data. And the data suggests that if this trend continues of the Link Bitcoin valuation, if it just simply continues going up exponentially, right, which is a big if, we don't know if it will or not, but if this trend just simply continues for the next 2 to 3 years, and it reaches this valuation, and Bitcoin continues the trend that it has been on for the last 10 years, and let's say it reaches approximately $100,000 Bitcoin, and the ratio of Link Bitcoin is 0.01, then that would put Link at $1,000. Again, this is not a sensationalist video where I'm claiming, oh, it has to go here because it's clickbait and that will get the views. But it's just saying, let's take a pragmatic approach. There's a popular saying of, oh, Link's going to be $1,000 end of year. You just don't tell people what year. And no, in this video, we're going to say, well, is it possible that it reaches that in this market cycle? And so the first idea is that, well, the best chance it has to reach that is if my thesis of lengthening cycles is correct. Because if it is correct, it gives Link a longer period of time to continue this exponential growth in a bull market. Okay, so hold up here for a second, right? Let's back up because there's one thing we're not taking into account. Okay, last cycle. So what we're doing right now is we're taking the peak of Bitcoin and comparing it to a theoretical peak of Link against Bitcoin. But last cycle, if you remember, Bitcoin peaked in December 2017, while the total market cap peaked in January of 2018, in the first week or two of January 2018. And so by the time the entire cryptocurrency market cap peaked, Bitcoin was only worth approximately 87% of its own peak. So I think Bitcoin was approximately $18,000 or $17,000, whereas at the peak it was at $20,000. So if the Link Bitcoin ratio were to cross 0.01, Bitcoin could reach $100,000, but by the time the Link Bitcoin ratio reaches it, it could be, maybe Bitcoin goes to 100K or 140K and then retraces back down some. Let's say it goes to 100K for simplicity. Maybe it retraces back down to like $85,000, and then the Link Bitcoin ratio hits 0.1, and then this would put Link at $850 in that scenario. So you have to recognize that Bitcoin's peak will likely precede Chainlink's peak. Okay, and that's just based on historical data that we've seen in market cycles, that Bitcoin tends to peak first, and then for a few weeks following Bitcoin's peak, you might see this altcoin mania, and then that's what can cause these insane final blow off tops of altcoin valuations against Bitcoin. And then therefore, it might not be as simple as saying, well, let's take Bitcoin's projected peak and look at the link Bitcoin ratio and then just multiply it by that, because you have to recognize that the peak for Bitcoin likely will come before the peak for Link. Therefore, it would likely put the Link valuation against Bitcoin lower than if you were just comparing it against Bitcoin's peak. So either way, it could theoretically put Link at approximately $1,000, right? Approximately $1,000 if this trend were to continue. Now, whether I think that's going to happen is a completely different story, right? At the end of the day, it does not matter what I think. What I think is completely irrelevant. We just look at the data and we go where the data takes us. And so far, we made this observation of the link Bitcoin ratio last year, and we've continued to capitalize on it. And if you're on the premium list, you were fully aware of this most recent bubble we had, and I put out the alerts along the way saying that we were at our historical local top, most likely, for the link Bitcoin valuation, and we were. My last sell was at 1850. I did not hit the top, but I got pretty darn close, and it allowed me to buy back in at $7 or $8 once the risk came back down to the level I deemed appropriate for my own risk tolerance, risk reward goals. And it allowed me to buy back in at $7 and $8. It was all published on the premium list. You can find it at intothecryptoverse.com. So then, we have to, you have to imagine a world where this holds, this continues, but you also have to imagine possibilities where it doesn't. And if it doesn't, and if it starts to level off over a few years, it doesn't mean that that's necessarily a bad thing for Link. It just means that it might not peak quite as high. For instance, if it starts to come over here and starts to level off a bit, and maybe it looks like more of a logarithmic regression curve where it has the most rapid increase early on, and then as we continue on, it starts to level off a bit, it could mean that maybe we see a few $100 Chainlink, right? Even if this trend remotely continues, and let's say we dip down below it and we come in at say point 0.004 as opposed to 0.01, it could still theoretically put us at like a $400 Chainlink, a $300 Chainlink, something like that. So I still think there's a lot of gains to be made with Chainlink over the macro scale. As I've said before, it's a coin that I think is too risky not to hold. This is not financial advice. This is my own analysis of the markets. And in fact, if you look at modern portfolio theory and the efficient frontier, as I said in the last video, including Chainlink in your portfolio does improve your risk-adjusted returns, because negative volatility of Bitcoin is offset by positive volatility of Chainlink and vice versa. So I think it's a good duo to have in your portfolio. I also think Ethereum is a great one too. So again, I'm not, we do no paid promotions on the channel. I don't even have any advertisements enabled. It's all me just speaking what I think. And this is, we go where the data takes us and nowhere else. We go where the data takes us and nowhere else. So we'll follow the data. We'll see if this trend continues. If it does, we'll be there to capitalize on it. If it doesn't, we'll recognize it and we'll deal with it at the time. But remember, all of this could be true in terms of $1,000 Chainlink if the trend holds. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed the content. Remember to subscribe to the channel. If you like the content, give the video a thumbs up. We also do have the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. We are almost at 7,000 members there. And then if you guys do like the content and you want exclusive content, you can check out my website at intothecryptoverse.com. You'll get access to weekly premium reports, weekly premium videos, a private Telegram alerts channel and chat room, and a risk dashboard, which is what I use to trade. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave me a comment down below to let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time. Bye.